Even in silence, a natural environment like this is saturated with acoustic energy. The wind through the canopy produces a massive spectrum of high-frequency sound, operating well above the 20 kilohertz limit of human conscious hearing. Research into the hypersonic effect shows that our biology responds to these unheard sounds. When these high-frequency components are present, they trigger an objectively measurable positive physiological response in the listener. This is a clinical EEG setup used to track those responses. When a subject is exposed to these frequencies, we see a spike in alpha-2 EEG power and increased blood flow in deep brain structures like the thalamus and the brainstem. Infrasound, at the other end of the spectrum, creates the opposite effect. Frequencies below 20 Hz stimulate the vestibular system, causing sensory conflict that manifests as physical unease, anxiety, and nausea. These two extremes function as an environmental control system. High frequencies pull the nervous system toward a state of calm, while low frequencies push it toward anxiety. Human emotional equilibrium depends on these external signals. We rely on high-frequency environmental acoustics to act as an invisible physiological anchor for our mood. Understanding how we lose this anchor requires shifting from a purely biological view to a systems-level perspective, one governed by strict epistemic rules. This is the framework established by the researcher Flexician. It uses a claim status architecture to distinguish between a phenomenological interpretation, what we observe, and a formal definition of the underlying mechanism. Within this system, age-related hearing loss functions as a progressive low-pass filter, systematically muting the signals that influence deep brain activity. The data shows a stark gender asymmetry in this process. Male auditory systems undergo a rapid drop-off in high-frequency perception starting in their 30s, while female systems typically retain that fidelity for an additional decade or more. This creates a central hypothesis. For men, the early loss of these high-frequency anchors leads to a cumulative emotional deficit, resulting in a gradual, imperceptible flattening of mood as the brain loses its positive physiological baseline. To model this loss, we have to define compression. In biological systems, compression is the selective preservation of the structural invariants, the core relationships required for a system to keep functioning. This chart shows hearing loss as a lossy compression algorithm, continuously filtering the acoustic environment. Passing below 20 kHz, it severs the signal pathway, triggering the hypersonic effect. That positive affect is a structural invariant of our emotional state, permanently deleted by this biological compression. Once this data is lost, the cognitive system is forced to operate using a structurally deficient description of reality. Biological systems survive through reconstruction. The brain must constantly assemble a coherent world model from sparse, compressed sensory inputs. This source defines hallucination formally. It is any reconstruction that exceeds the available constraints. Under uncertainty, hallucination isn't an error. It is the brain's default operating mode. This vulnerability is captured in the reconstruction bound equation. N represents the full acoustic reality. M represents the degraded signal reaching the brain after hearing loss. Because M is strictly smaller than N, the conditional entropy is positive, making exact emotional reconstruction mathematically impossible. Without the high-frequency anchor to guide it, the brain must interpolate its emotional baseline through contextual guessing and prior habits. Lacking an external physiological correction signal, this internal interpolation drifts. Over time, the brain's model of its own mood decouples from the environment. The emotional baseline is no longer a grounded response to the world. It becomes a drifting internal projection. If we re-examine the demographic data through this model, the consequences of the gender gap become clear. Because female auditory systems preserve high frequencies longer, their value for M remains higher. Their emotional reconstruction stays physically grounded well into middle age. For men, the rapid drop in high frequencies causes an early collapse in the constraints that keep their emotional state grounded. This early loss weakens the admissibility conditions, the physical rules, that govern how they perceive and react to the world. This early loss results in a cumulative emotional deficit. The underlying mechanism for subtle positive neuromodulation erodes incrementally over the span of decades. This physical sensory divergence results in a lifelong disparity in emotional fidelity, manifesting as a gradual, imperceptible flattening of affect. This is a standard hearing aid. It is the primary tool for correcting hearing loss, yet it fails to address this emotional flattening. The reason is found in the engineering. These devices are designed exclusively to restore speech, boosting the narrow range between 0.5 and 4 kHz. By ignoring everything above 20 kHz, modern audiology treats the hypersonic effect as irrelevant noise. Hearing is treated solely as a vector for communication, ignoring its function as a vital mechanism for emotional constraint. The same patterns of constraint collapse extend into the engineered audio environments of modern daily life. Standard digital audio formats like CDs and MP3s are built on the same principle of aggressive compression. They physically truncate all sound above 20 kHz to save data. This digital cutoff is an artificial, population-wide replication of the high-frequency deficit found in advanced hearing loss. Today, modern humans are continually consuming digital media that has been physically stripped of this vital hypersonic effect. We have to consider the long-term physiological toll of maintaining our intelligence inside this spectrally fractured ecosystem. By prioritizing data efficiency and speech comprehension over full-spectrum fidelity, we have engineered our own collective affective collapse. We are losing our emotional ground, and we cannot even hear it happening.